You're watching Tower Hamlets Slice's election coverage ahead of the local elections on the 7th of May. We're delighted to be speaking to Sirajul Islam, currently a Labour Party councillor for Bethnal Green East and Labour's candidate for mayor in the local elections on May the 7th.
Thank you, Billy, for having me and for your time. Very grateful.
So, you have been in Tower Hamlets politics for over 25 years. What achievement are you most proud of?
Oh God, lots of achievement. What can I think about? Well, first, getting elected is an achievement into Hamlets. I stood in a by-election in 2001, in a fairly safe Lib Dem ward. So I took a Lib Dem seat, so that was quite an achievement. Even had a BNP candidate standing against me, I remember, at that election. So it was an achievement kind of winning that by-election. I suppose there are lots of highlights in that 25 years, but maybe the most one that I talk to people, and I did my first cabinet role, 2001, social services, it was called then. So you had the adult and children's social services together in one social service department. That's my first cabinet portfolio. Leader at the time, Ilal Abbas, asked me to do that. And I had a kind of panic, oh God, cabinet, am I ready for a cabinet post? Anxiety and so on. So anyway, I took it, and Abbas said, oh, you work in the NHS, so you could understand health and social care. I said, well, yeah, but I don't work in that kind of NHS. I work in the comms team. So anyway, so I took on that role, and I remember going to see the director of social services, a man called Ian Wilson, lovely guy. I still keep in touch with Ian, and we had introductions, and he said, "You want the good news or the bad news?" I said, "Well, give me the bad news." And he said, "We've got £5 million overspend in the directorate." And I said, "What's the good news?" "We have a plan." I said, "Okay, that sounds positive." So, give me the plan. So he had a list of savings and targets to achieve to kind of bring that balance down, the £5 million, and mostly it was children's service with Victoria Colombier, following Victoria Colombier, more local authorities are putting children in care, and that got the budgets overspent, etc. So that's one problem. The second thing was at those days the social services were inspected by the Social Care Inspectorate, and they're given star ratings. So we're operating kind of 1 star, 3 star, kind of top performing social service department in the country. So I wanted us to be a top performing 3 star social service department under my watch. I didn't want us to be languishing in 1 star, because our residents deserve a good, excellent social care services. So we had to deal with the overspend and put in a plan how we can kind of move up to reaching the 3 star target. So I was in the media quite a lot in those days. You didn't have your Twitter and Facebook and social media, is more the local newspapers. So we had the East London Advertiser, so regularly in the newspaper, people criticizing us and so on. And there's a letters page. I remember people would kind of write letters in the letters page about their concerns, etc. So it's a good thing that we listen to people. It's a good way of listening. I proactively went out to visit services. One was for me to learn about social care, and secondly, engage with people to understand, listen to them. We had this list of savings to achieve, and cabinet meeting wasn't very pleasant. We had the opposition, Lib Dems at the time, obviously taking political capital out of it. Council meetings, regular questions, etc. There was a campaign called SOS. I remember Save Our Service campaign. They were very active. They came to cabinet meetings, scrutiny meetings, etc., etc. I even had a death threat on the phone from somebody when I did that role. But it had to be done. We had to balance the budget and look at the performance of the directorate as well. So I had to learn the KPIs by heart. I used to keep one in my bag. I used to keep the letter from the Social Inspectorate in my bag where they found weaknesses in the services. So, I can reference that and look up to that. And I challenged the corporate director and the 2 directors, children, adult, that I wanted us to become a 3-star service within the lifetime of the administration, as well as balance the budget. So cutting the long story short, we did not take all the saving as suggested. We managed to save lots of services on the cards. We found money we did put money into the directorate through the budget process. We were able to balance the £5 million budget, increase social services budget, and within 3 years we did become 3-star social service department, best in the country. And that's a legacy that I'm quite proud of. That's my first cabinet role. I did, and I talk about it often. And it was very challenging. It was a very difficult time. Balancing £5 million and at the same time, finding a process whereby we can, improve our performance and become, 3-star social service department.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Over the last decade and a half, Tower Hamlets Labour has lost to Lutfur Rahman's political parties. Why do you think many residents have withdrawn their support?
Well, I think it's more kind of populist politics, I suppose. Lutfur Rahman, 2010, when he got elected against a Labour candidate. I think Halal Abbas was the candidate at the time. I think Lutfur was Labour candidate, and the party decided to withdraw his nomination. And there was a bit of a backlash, I think, from the community. He was able to kind of portray that in the community as something that, he should have been allowed to run, and the party took that away from him. So having a good narrative and a good story is always good. I think, he had a good narrative, good story, and people in Tower Hamlets has always been kind of fair people, in terms of kind of give people a fair chance, justice, etc. And residents, voters felt that perhaps there's some injustice done with him in 2010, and they decided to back him instead of our Labour candidate. Tower is a predominantly Bangladeshi Muslim community, so he was able to penetrate, I suppose, into that community with his story and the narrative, etc., to make people, convinced that he was the right person for this borough to serve as mayor.
Will you say that this narrative was the same in 2022 when he ran against John Bakes?
I think he did the same narrative because the High Court found him guilty of electoral fraud, obviously, banned him from office. He came back in 2022 again. I think he used the same narrative about victimhood and the system is against him, etc. Some of his narrative around the police investigation. If you recall, there's an investigation about fraud. The police found no evidence. I think he used that to say, well, there was an investigation and there was nothing found. So I'm kind of innocent. I'm not referenced too much on the High Court decision, and you feed people information in a way that people kind of feed that information, then you can get that narrative penetrating into the voters. So I suppose they did a good story. Again, the election day, I think the turnout wasn't that high either. If there was a high turnout, and I think certainly different communities came out to vote, maybe perhaps the result could have been different. I don't know. I looked at the mark register in my ward in Rutland East after the election, and there are pockets of area, very few people came out to vote. I don't know why, but very few people came out to vote in certainly my ward.
Thank you. So the Greens and Tower Hamlets Independents have both suggested that there is little difference between Aspire and Labour. Which of your policies would you like voters to see setting you apart from the current administration?
Well, we haven't adopted our policies yet. We're in the process of our manifesto, so into the internal process of talking to our members and candidates and so forth. So we have to go through that process before I can, give you an example of a policy, for example. But I think difference between Aspire and Labour, we're Labour, they're Aspire, they're independent. There is a difference. We're not part of them, and they're not part of us. We're a mainstream political party. We're Labour candidates. And the difference is how we conduct ourselves as well. So, you've seen recently the government intervention, envoys, the failure of the best value duty in the council led to the envoys being installed to enable the council to meet its statutory obligation. Recently, the Secretary of State made the announcement to give powers to the envoys to take certain things over in the council, like governance and finance and grants and assets and so on and so forth. So there is a big difference between us and Aspire. We're a party for everyone. We represent all sections of the community. We conduct ourselves impeccably in public and in the council chamber. We're up to scrutiny. We're happy to be challenged and scrutinized. It's very difficult to scrutinize the mayor in Tower Hamlets in the current way the council is running. So if the Greens are saying we're same, we're not similar at all. I'm standing to be the mayor of Tower Hamlets. I'm a Labour candidate. I'm very proud, privileged to be so. Served as a Labour councillor 25 years, and if I'm elected, I want to change that. I want mature politics in Tower Hamlets. I want a council that speaks for all sections of the community. I want to be a mayor that is open to challenge, open to scrutiny. I want to be a mayor that is public facing. I want to do the best for the residents of this borough under the constraints. I want to leave a legacy in this council. I might serve 1 term, 2 terms, but I want to serve a legacy of proper politics in this borough, not this divisive politics. Not the politics of the way Aspire are doing. I want to make sure the commissioners or the envoys are departed and we're able to run this council ourselves. We need to be seen in London, if certainly wider areas, that we're a serious council. We run this council well. We don't want to be seen as a kind of laughing stock. When you say Tower Hamlets to people, they kind of take a step back. And I want to restore this council as it should be. A proper council, a council that kind of delivers local people, a council that people can be proud of, a council that people in London talk about, and not for the wrong reasons.
Thank you. So in practice on this, and as you mentioned the best value report, the council raised concerns about financial scrutiny, staff retention in key roles, how the leadership decided to award appointments and contracts. A follow-up peer review found some improvements, but do you think these issues are unique to Aspire's leadership, and what in practice will you do differently to remedy them if you're elected?
But I think they are, because the lightning doesn't strike twice. When he was mayor last time, 2014, I think the government sent in commissioners to run this council. They found statutory failures and they took over running of the council. This time, the government sent in envoys to help the council enable to meet its statutory obligation. But because the progress has been slow, this is why the government is now giving powers to the envoys to take over certain aspects of running of the council. So it happened twice under the same mayor, although the name has changed from Tower Hamlets First to Aspire, but practically it's the same mayor, it's the same party. So yes, I think under my leadership, if I was mayor, then I would run the council in a much more, how shall I say, robust, transparent way. We're a mainstream political party. There is checks and balances, accountability with me. With the independent mayor, where is the accountability? Where is the checks and balances? It is not a national party who could come and take action or, give instructions. If I was the mayor, same things happen. I'm sure the National Labour Party would be interested. I'm sure the London Regional Labour Party would be interested. I have accountability towards my group members. I have accountability towards Times Labour Party. So there is checks and balances, when you're a mainstream political party, such as Labour Party, and people will make sure that, we're not straying away such things. And, I'm open to criticism, people make mistakes, I'm sure I'll make mistakes and I will make mistakes, and I'm sure I've made mistakes. But, I'm open to criticism, I'm open to scrutiny.
In response to the recent budget, you said that you would not put up council tax by more than 2% in any given year. How can you commit to that pledge without knowing financial needs of the borough in the future?
Well, this council has got plenty of money. When John Biggs was mayor, he managed the budget prudently. He left a large reserve in the council, although Aspire mayor criticised John for not spending that money. But I think he was being prudent, saving it for a rainy day, and not kind of spending flamboyantly, taxpayers' money, and being responsible with it. We've said at the budget meeting, and my colleague Mark Francis, that the government in the recent financial settlement has given this council £56 million, I think, next year, and then subsequent years another 56 and 56. So money is coming in from government, and therefore we feel there is no need to put council tax with the maximum 5%, given that, the financial settlements have been good and this council has got plenty of money in its budget, and therefore we feel confident that if I was the mayor next year, that we'll just take the 2%. And we're seeing overspending every year as well in this council. If you look at the MTFS, you'll find there's overspend. The mayor's overspent is £59 million reserves last year, and this 5% council tax is more to replenish the overspend. We'll make a commitment that, if I did become mayor, that we'll just put the 2%, we'll just take the 2% social debt precept. We would not take maximum council because, I think financially this council is able to do that.
You propose building more genuinely affordable council-owned homes. How would you balance house building with concerns over overdevelopment, loss of light, and lack of infrastructure?
Well, you've seen recently we opposed the mayor's local plan, which proposes to put lots of tall buildings across the borough, which is something that we're concerned with, exactly as you said, about density, about kind of, daylight, sunlight, and also thinking about our residents' health needs as well, our children's health need. I spoke at the council meeting and I gave example of the 70s tower blocks. We still have some of those. I was knocking on door in one of those tower blocks on Saturday. It's not very nice. It's quite depressing. Some of these places to bring up a family, having children, having older people living there. And I quote as a council meeting, imagine, a family living on the 15th floor. A child wants to go out to play, they have to take the lift from the 15th floor. We know social housing, sometimes the lift doesn't work. And how to keep families, parents keep an eye on the children about the safety, etc. And we often seen cases where tower blocks are prone to depression, health issues, etc. Things have changed obviously in the 21st century. I'm sure the tower blocks much pleasant, much nicer than the 70s, but they're still fundamentally the issues are the same. So we will be not building lots of tower blocks. We'll be delivering low-rise council homes for our residents so that they can have a nice home as well as the environment that they should be living in, safe play areas, safe spaces for children, older people, families, and a sense of community. I think tower blocks do not create a sense of community, and that is my vision if I was mayor. And I did the housing portfolio, as you know, for 6 years previously when John Biggs was mayor. And, we pledged to build 2,000 council homes. We delivered 1,000 and we left 1,000 in the pipeline, which is now coming through. And the current mayor is kind of, taking credit or cutting the ribbons, which I'm sure there's no problem. Whoever the mayor is, of course, will cut the ribbon. And I can name those blocks that are coming out of the system now. There's 3 in my own ward. There's 2 in Wickford Street. There's 1 in O'Brien House Garages, which I took offices around. Nice houses there. There's 3 4-bedroom, 4 closed garages. I got knocked down. That's recently been completed. There are some new 4-bedroom houses started in Bucker Street behind Donegal House and Sovereign House, which again, some garages that I took offices in 2019 to say, can we build some houses there? Rushmead, another one that's coming on stream. So I can name individual sites that, I was involved in. I'm very passionate about housing, and I walked the borough to find those sites and to deliver council housing.
After last week's Gorton and Denton by-election result, where a historically Labour seat was won by the Green Party, do you see Labour's main competitor in the borough as Aspire or the Greens?
I think this election, it's difficult to predict. Obviously, you can't predict how the electors are going to vote, but I can say safely that it's a contest between Aspire and Labour, me and the current mayor. Every other political party have a right to put up candidate, but I think that is what's going to boil down to. I think the Gorton Denton result is a kind of national scale. As the parliamentary election, we're talking about more local elections, about local councillors and local mayor. Of course, the Greens would be very happy with the result, but it's a mid-term result. You get those setbacks often, whoever is in government. But we're campaigning on local issues, what matters to local people, housing, the environment, community safety, schools, older people. They're the issues that we're fighting on, the waste, recycling, street cleaning. And these are the people that people are passionate about, and they're the people that matters, and they're the things that we're trying to tackle and address and give the resident of the borough a different option, different commitment. And saying, we will take those issues seriously, and our manifestos will, spell those out as well. I'm a resident. I've lived in Hamlets all my life. Went to primary school here. All of those issues matters to me. Regardless if I'm elected on 7th of May or not, I still live in this borough, still be a resident, and these are the issues that matters to me and my family and rest of Tower Hamlets as well. And it's important that whoever the mayor and local councillors are, they deal with the bread and butter of Tower Hamlets rather than sort of the national stuff that is going on, which a little bit beyond us.
What's more important, reducing crime, protecting the environment, or tackling the cost of living crisis?
Well, I think all of them are really important. But I think cost of living crisis is really important because it's kind of overarching. I suppose people are suffering now. We've got the war in Iran, means that cost of living crisis is even more paramount importance because we're hearing on the news that the energy cost is going to go up. Food cost will go up, despite the government bringing inflation down, despite energy bills are coming down, which all sounded positive. Interest rate have come down, all sounded positive, but with this sudden war in Iraq, Donald Trump's war, it seems that maybe, the cost of living crisis will become a crisis again. And I think it's very important, for us to make sure that our residents are protected as much as possible from the council resources, as well as lobbying our government, our MPs, to make sure that the government does their bit as well, to send resources to boroughs like Tower Hamlets, where we have, high density, overcrowding, population, poverty, child poverty, older people, and we need this. And we know that where people struggle, crime goes up, of course, and we know that oil and gas increase, prices increasing, and people resort to food bank, etc., and to making sure that charities and food banks are supported as well during this crisis.
Thank you. That's all the questions I had. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, well, I'm Tower Hamlets resident. Came to the UK after the Bangladesh Liberation War in the 1970s with my parents. So we came early 1970s, 72, I think, roughly. Landed Heathrow Airport. My cousins, so I've got a third generation of Scousers in Liverpool. So, so I went straight to Liverpool from Heathrow, stayed there for a while. My father was a teacher in Bangladesh, but he lived in Bradford, so he worked in the factory. So he worked in the cotton mills. So that's where work was. So he took us over to Bradford. We stayed there for a while. My brother worked in the cotton mills. My father wasn't very well. He had kind of heart attack, etc. And then he decided to go back to Bangladesh and with my two younger brothers, and left me in Tower Hamlets with my older brother and me with my brother-in-law in Brick Lane in Spelman Street. So we lived there in the 70s, early 70s, 74. And then when my sister came over, we moved to Broxley Street, just off Myland Road. So I went to Malmesbury Primary School, and then we moved to St. George's Estate in Wapping. I went to St. Paul's Primary School, to my primary school. So, I lived through the 70s challenges of Tower Hamlets, sort of the anti-racist movement. I suppose, it wasn't very pleasant in those days. I enjoyed my football. Very difficult to go out and play football in a place like Weaversfield, for example. I remember in those days, people went in groups when they went out to protect themselves. Racism was very rife in the 70s and 80s. School was very difficult. I worked in the rag trade for a while. I left school, left education. My parents came back. There was a pressure on me to go to work. There was lots of debt, family debt that had to be sorted. So I worked in the rag trade. I suppose when I worked in the rag trade, the community activism that I started kind of getting involved in and learning, I suppose. So, I worked in the rag trade. I worked in the factory in New Road, worked in a factory in Ford Square, worked in other places. And I saw how difficult people are having in those days. I think the council was Labour Council, then it changed to Lib Dems. The Lib Dems took over. There's a lot of prejudice, I suppose. They had the neighbourhood system set up, so some of the neighbourhoods that were not controlled by Lib Dems, they starved them of resources. and Bow, places like Bow and Globetown neighbourhood and other places were washed with money. They're having got railings painted in black and gold, where places like Wapping and Stepney and Poplar were kind of neglected. And that's when I kind of started becoming more involved in politics and so on. I earned very little money working in the factory, doing the machining. I used to have queues of people coming to see me about their benefit forms, interpreting for people at hospital appointments, interpreting people at tribunal. So I used to do all of that during my working time and less work. And the guy who used to manage the factory, I still keep in touch with him. He's the one who started introducing me to various people because he thought I had potential. And he was the one who would start screaming and shouting at people, say, go away, leave him alone, he needs to work. He needs to earn a bit of money. This is all voluntary work, he's doing for you. So I used to say, look, fine. I'll help them as much as I can. So through that, I suppose, helping people kind of open my eyes, my formative years, then I became a little bit, slowly got involved in the community, activism, etc. And then I think it was 1994 when when a landslide from the Lib Dems, that's when I kind of worked really hard as a local activist. My ward was known as Holy Trinity Ward, always 3 Liberal safe seat. Labour put up 3 paper candidates. We thought, no, we'll prove them wrong. We worked very hard, and even, I think 2 of those candidates never even came to the ward. We got all 3 of them elected. And then, rest is, I suppose, I stood about election in 2001, got elected myself.
Thank you for speaking with us, Sirajul, and thank you for watching Tower Hamlets Slice election coverage.
Thank you, Billy. Really appreciate your time, and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.